It was a chilly October evening, the kind where the wind whispers secrets through the rustling leaves, and the world seems wrapped in a mysterious shroud of fog. I had agreed to house-sit for my friends, the Harrisons, who had ventured off to Mexico for a much-needed vacation. Their home, nestled in the outskirts of a small, rural town, was a beautiful, sprawling farmhouse, surrounded by dense woods and fields that stretched far into the horizon. The Harrisons had 2 German shepherds, Max and Luna. Max, the larger of the 2, had been trained by the police as a drug-sniffing dog, and Luna, equally formidable, was fiercely loyal. They were my only companions in the vast, silent house, which often felt too large and too empty. One night, about a week into my stay, the air was particularly biting, and the moon cast eerie shadows across the lonely countryside. I had just stepped into the shower, relishing the warmth, when a sudden, frantic barking from Max and Luna jolted me. Their growls were deep, guttural, filled with an urgency that I had never heard before. My heart pounding, I quickly turned off the water and grabbed a towel. Peering through the steamy bathroom window, I scanned the darkness outside but saw nothing. The dog's barking intensified, sending a chill down my spine. Something was wrong. Quietly, I tiptoed through the house, my every nerve on edge. The soft creaking of the old wooden floorboards under my feet seemed deafening in the oppressive silence. As I passed by the bedroom, a fleeting shadow outside the window caught my eye. My breath hitched. There was definitely someone out there. Gripping my pistol, a precaution I always took due to the remote location of the house, I moved towards the living room. My heart was racing, my hands trembling. The doorknob began to turn slowly, stealthily. Instinctively, I shouted, and the sound of my own voice startled me in the quiet house. The doorknob stopped moving, and I heard hurried footsteps retreating outside. I called 911, my voice barely a whisper, narrating the harrowing events. The dispatcher's calm voice was a lifeline in the chaos, telling me that help was on the way. I was instructed to wait for the police inside, a pistol in my hand, a heavy weight on my heart. The agonizing wait was punctuated by the soft glow of the Harrison security cameras on my phone. They had given me access to the app, and now I watched the grainy footage, hoping for a glimpse of the intruder. The shadows and the quality of the video concealed his identity, but the sense of violation of my safe haven being breached was palpable. The blue lights of the police cars finally pierced the darkness, a sight that brought tears to my eyes. I unlocked the cattle gate, still clutching my pistol, and led them to the house. They scoured the property, finding nothing but the lingering sense of an uninvited presence. In the days that followed, my husband joined me, a comforting presence in the unsettling quiet. We learned from a neighbor about a tent found in the woods weeks earlier, possibly belonging to a homeless person. It made me wonder if the intruder had been someone just seeking shelter, or if their intentions were more sinister. Since then, I've returned to house-sit for the Harrisons, the memory of that night etched in my mind. The question lingers, would I have used my pistol if the situation escalated? The answer is yes, but it's a thought that haunts me. In the solitude of the farmhouse, surrounded by the vast whispering fields, I often find myself staring into the shadows, hoping that the mysterious figure on the porch remains just a memory, never to be encountered again. I've never been one to believe in the supernatural. That is, until the events of last year shook the very foundations of my skepticism. My mother, a vibrant woman once brimming with life, had been battling breast cancer. It was her second fight with the disease, only this time it had cruelly spread to her lungs. Stage 4. The prognosis was grim. In her earlier years, my mother was deeply entrenched in New Age beliefs. She'd often speak of spirits and an afterlife, claiming that if possible she'd reach out to us from beyond. But her brush with mortality had turned her towards a more traditional faith. It seemed to give her peace in her final days. She chose not to go through the grueling process of chemotherapy again, instead moving to Colorado in search of alternative therapies. It worked to an extent, prolonging her life beyond what we'd hoped, but the inevitable couldn't be delayed forever. In the fall of 2017, she returned home to Alabama, wanting to make the most of her remaining time. Her decline was gradual. She was there for my wedding in Texas, and we even spent one last Christmas together, filled with laughter and cherished moments. She taught me how to make jelly and can it, passing on a family tradition. But in June of 2018, things began to change. She started speaking of shadow people, figures that moved through our yard, through the walls of our house, lingering beside her before vanishing. They weren't menacing, she said, just curious, but their presence unnerved me. I remembered her new age past and wondered if the veil between life and death was thinning for her. 3 months later, she passed away. The grief was overwhelming, but what followed was even more unsettling. I began to see her in my dreams. At first, these encounters left me shaken, a cocktail of distress and confusion clouding my mornings. Then, one night, the dream was different. My mother sat at our kitchen table, silent but with a peaceful aura. My Aunt Ruth, who had passed years ago, entered the scene, acknowledging my mother's presence with a casual, "Oops, I can't sit there, Bee's there." Stunned, I asked, "You can see her?" And she laughed. "Of course, she's visiting all of us." This revelation prompted me to call my Aunt Ruth's sister, my living aunt, to whom I tentatively mentioned the dream. To my shock, she too had been visited by my mother in her dreams, as had my sister and father. My mother was silent in my dreams, but to them, she gave advice and directions. Months passed, and the dreams continued. Then, 2 months ago, she spoke to me. She urged me to visit my grandmother soon, without giving a reason. The dream was so vivid, so pressing, that I woke up with tears on my cheeks. I called my sister immediately, relaying the message. She agreed to visit our grandmother, who, as it turned out, was starting to lose her grip on reality. It was as if my mother, from beyond, was warning us. Last week, my grandmother's health took a turn for the worse. She's now under hospice care, her days numbered. As I prepare to fly back, I can't shake the feeling that my mother, from wherever she is, orchestrated this warning. She had always said she'd bring us proof of an afterlife, and in a way, haunting as it is, she did. As I sit here reflecting on that night, the memories still send chills down my spine. It was a time when life seemed simpler, living in a small, remote town in Maine, where the dense forests seemed to hold secrets of their own. Our house stood isolated on a vast stretch of land. I lived there with my parents and younger sister, Lily. It was a typical Friday night, and we had all retired to our rooms after a quiet dinner. The house, with its creaky floorboards and drafty windows, always had a way of amplifying the night sounds, but that night there was an unsettling silence that seemed to engulf everything. I remember glancing at the clock as it struck 3 a.m., a time when the world seemed to be in a deep slumber. Suddenly, a faint knocking sound broke the silence. Initially, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks, but the knocking grew louder and more persistent. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest as I tiptoed to my sister's room. Her eyes, wide with fear, mirrored my feelings. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, and we both crept to the hallway, the old wooden floor groaning under our feet. Peering down from the top of the stairs, the sight that greeted us was unnerving. 2 shadowy figures stood at our front door, their features obscured by the darkness. The knocking continued, now accompanied by muffled voices. My mind raced with possibilities. Who could possibly be at our door at this ungodly hour? I felt a protective instinct kick in, thinking about my family's safety. I remembered the hunting rifle my father kept in his closet, and, without a second thought, I retrieved it, the weight of the responsibility heavy in my hands. Lily and I sneaked back to the top of the stairs, our hearts pounding in unison. We could see our parents now, standing in the shadows, watching the front door with a mix of fear and confusion. Our family dog, Max, was growling softly, his hackles raised. Suddenly, the figures vanished from the front door, only to reappear at the back of the house. The sound of them trying to force open the French doors sent a wave of terror through me. My mother's whispered prayers filled the air as my father, with a steadiness that surprised me, dialed 911. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. The intruders, realizing they couldn't break in, returned to the front door, their knocking more desperate now. But then, the flashing lights of the police cars pierced the darkness, and the figures bolted. One of them disappeared into the woods, but the other was quickly apprehended. The police found the second man hiding in an old shed behind our house. Both were under the influence, and one was found with drugs in his possession. They were arrested, but we never learned what became of them after that night. That incident left us all shaken and more aware of our vulnerability, even in our seemingly safe haven. The quiet nights are no longer as comforting, and the creaks and groans of our old house now serve as a constant reminder of the night we faced our fears head-on. I was 15 when it all started, in a quiet, upscale suburb of Seattle. My neighborhood was the kind you'd see on postcards: manicured lawns, friendly neighbors, and a sense of security that made parents comfortable letting their kids play outside until dusk. But that sense of safety was shattered one autumn evening. It was just after my family had moved into our new house. The area was known for its tranquility, except for occasional whispers about a nearby neighborhood with a shady reputation. I remember it was a Friday. I'd just gotten home from school, lost in the world of my headphones, oblivious to what awaited me. Entering the house, I immediately sensed something amiss. Our living room window was wide open, the curtains fluttering like distressed flags in the cool breeze. My heart raced as I noticed the shattered glass and the unmistakable muddy boot print on the carpet. The house felt violated, its sanctity breached. My parents, upon returning, were equally shocked but reasoned it might have been an accident. Perhaps our cat, Luna, had knocked over something. We wanted to believe in that small comfort. But the second break-in, a few weeks later, dispelled all our hopeful theories. Again, nothing was taken, but the same muddy boot print haunted our living room. It was clear, someone was targeting our home. The real terror, however, unfolded months later. My parents had gone out for a movie night, leaving me alone. I was in the basement, engrossed in a video game, the sounds of virtual warfare drowning out the world around me. Luna was curled up on my lap, a small island of comfort in the growing unease I felt being alone. Then, without warning, Luna hissed and bolted, disappearing into the shadows. Confused, I removed my headphones and listened. The house was eerily silent, but then I heard it, a faint creak, as if someone was moving cautiously upstairs. Panic surged through me. I crept to the basement door, only to see it wide open, swaying slightly. Hadn't I closed it? My mind raced with fear. That's when I saw a shadow move across the hallway upstairs. Someone was in the house. Acting on instinct, I bolted out of the basement, not even daring to look back. I sprinted across the street to my neighbor's house, hiding in their yard, my heart pounding in my chest. From my hiding spot, I watched in horror as a figure moved past the front window of my house. A tall man, dressed in dark clothes, his movements slow, deliberate. I fumbled with my phone, trying to call my parents, but there was no answer. Desperate, I called my older brother, who was working at a nearby store. He answered immediately, and within minutes, police were on their way. The intruder, unaware of my escape, continued to lurk around our house. I watched from my hiding place as my neighbor, armed and cautious, approached my house. The man inside seemed to sense something amiss and quickly retreated the way he had come in, vanishing into the darkening evening. The police arrived, their lights piercing the dusk, and they searched the house thoroughly but found no one. My parents returned home, their faces etched with worry and relief as they hugged me tightly. The next day, a neighbor from down the street contacted us. They had seen a man sprinting through the woods behind our houses that night, disappearing into the shadows. Reflecting on that terrifying night, I realized the chilling truth. This man had been watching, waiting for the right moment when I was alone. The thought of what might have happened if Luna hadn't alerted me was too horrifying to contemplate. Following that night, I was never the same. The sound of footsteps, even in broad daylight, sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't bear to be alone in the house, and the swing in the backyard where I once found solace now stood as a grim reminder of the eyes that might have watched from the woods. I owe my life to Luna, my guardian in fur. Her instinctual alertness saved me from a potentially dire encounter. Even now, as I've moved on to college, the memories of those break-ins, the man in the shadows, and the feeling of being watched linger in my mind, a haunting reminder of the fragility of safety. I live in a towering apartment complex in the heart of the city, a place where the shadows of skyscrapers fall long and deep after sunset. My life here has always been a balance between the convenience of urban living and the uneasy awareness of the city's darker corners. A year ago, things took a terrifying turn. It was a chilly October evening, the kind where the wind whispers secrets down empty streets. My boyfriend Alex and I were returning from a rare midweek dinner date. The city's nightlife buzzed around us, but our building's parking lot was a pool of uneasy quiet. As we pulled into the visitors section, I noticed a figure lurking near the dumpsters, a man, disheveled, with wild eyes that seemed to flicker with an inner turmoil. We locked the car doors instinctively, an unspoken fear settling between us. Alex insisted on walking me to the building's entrance. The man watched us, his gaze unsettling, but he kept his distance. Just as I began to relax, thinking we'd avoided any confrontation, the man exploded into a frenzy of movement. He lunged at our car, his screams piercing the night. His hands were a blur, pounding against the windows, his face twisted in rage. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribcage as Alex shouted for me to run. Somehow, I found my legs and dashed towards the building entrance. My key trembled in my hand as I fumbled with the lock, the metallic clicks echoing in the empty lot. I glanced back to see the man charging towards me, a nightmarish figure under the flickering streetlight. I stumbled through the door just in time, slamming it shut on his twisted face. His screams were muffled by the glass, his breath fogging it in angry bursts. I leaned against the door, gasping for air, my whole body shaking. The police arrived quickly, but the man vanished into the night, a ghost in the urban darkness. For months afterward, his presence haunted the edges of my life. He'd appear at odd hours, his wails a chilling serenade that kept the residents awake. Cars in the visitors' lot were found scratched and dented, a silent testament to his rage. Then last week, the building installed a new, more secure gate. A collective sigh of relief swept through the residents. We thought it was over. But tonight, as I lay in my bed scrolling through social media, a soft weeping shattered the silence. My blood turned cold. I peeked through the blinds and saw him in the back alley, his body shaking with sobs. Then, without warning, his sadness morphed into fury. He began to jog erratically, his cries morphing into guttural groans. He threw himself against the new fence, his body a blur of desperation and madness. Then, as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone, swallowed up by the night. Now I sit here, my heart still racing, the echoes of his cries lingering in the air. The city feels different now, darker, more menacing. I can't shake the feeling that this isn't the end. Somewhere out there, in the shadowed alleys of the city, he waits. And in those shadows, my fear grows, a constant reminder that safety is just an illusion in this urban jungle.